My father was a straightforward man, and he had had this quality since childhood. By my own recollection, he was neither jollier nor more melancholy than the other men we knew, maybe a little quieter. It happened one day that father ordered a boat. He was very serious about it. It was to be made especially for him of mimosa wood. It was to be sturdy enough to last 20 or 30 years and just large enough for one person. Mother carried on plenty about it. Was her husband going to become a fisherman of a sudden, or a hunter? Father said nothing. Our house was less than a mile from the river, which around there was deep, quiet, and so wide you couldn't see across it. I can never forget the day the rowboat was delivered. Father showed no joy or other emotion. He just put on his hat as he always did and said goodbye to us. He took along no food or bundle of any sort. We expected Mother to rant and rave, but she didn't. She looked very pale and bit her lip, and all she said was, "If you go away, stay away. Don't ever come back." Father made no reply. He looked gently at me and motioned me to walk along with him. I feared Mother's wrath, yet I eagerly obeyed. We headed toward the river together. I felt bold and exhilarated, so much so that I said, "Father, will you take me with you in your boat?" He just looked at me, gave me a blessing, and by his gesture told me to go back. I made as if to do so, but when his back was turned, I ducked behind some bushes to watch him. Father got into the boat and rowed away. It slid across the water like a crocodile, long and quiet. Father did not come back, nor did he go anywhere, really. He just rowed and floated across and around out there in the river. Everyone was appalled. What had never happened, what could not possibly happen, was happening. Our relatives, neighbours and friends came over to discuss the phenomenon. Mother was ashamed. She said little and conducted herself with great composure. As a consequence, almost everyone thought, though no one said it, that Father had gone insane. Travellers along the river and people living near the bank on one side or the other reported that Father never put foot on land by day or night. He just moved about on the river, solitary, aimless, like a derelict. Mother and our relatives agreed that the food which he had doubtless hidden in the boat would soon run out, and that then he would either leave the river and travel off somewhere which would be at least a little more respectable, or he would repent and come home. How far from the truth they were! Father had a secret source of provisions, me. Every day I stole food and brought it to him. The first night after he left, we all lit fires on the shore and prayed and called to him. I was deeply distressed and felt a need to do something more. The following day I went down to the river with a loaf of cornbread, a bunch of bananas and some bricks of raw brown sugar. I waited impatiently a long, long hour. Then I saw the boat, far off, alone, gliding almost imperceptibly on the smoothness of the river. Father was sitting in the bottom of the boat. He saw me, but he did not row toward me or make any gesture. I showed him the food, and then I placed it in a hollow rock on the riverbank. It was safe there from animals, rain, and dew. I did this day after day, on and on. Later I learned, to my surprise, that Mother knew what I was doing, and she left food around where I could easily steal it. She had a lot of feelings she didn't show. One day, at her request, the priest put on his vestments, went down to the shore and tried to exorcise the devils that had got into my father. He shouted that Father had a duty to cease his unholy obstinacy. Another day she arranged to have 2 soldiers come and try to frighten him, all to no avail. My father went by in the distance, sometimes so far away he could barely be seen. He never replied to anyone, and no one ever got close to him. When some newspaper men came in a launch to take his picture, Father headed his boat to the other side of the river and into the marshes, which he knew like the back of his hand, but in which other people quickly got lost. There, in his private maze, which extended for miles, with heavy foliage overhead and rushes on all sides, he was safe. Day and night, in sun and rain, in heat and in the terrible mid-year cold spells, with his old hat on his head and very little other clothing, week after week, month after month, year after year, unheedful of the waste and emptiness in which his life was slipping by, he never set foot on earth or grass, on isle or mainland shore. What could his state of health have been? How about the continual drain on his energy, pulling and pushing the oars to control the boat? And how did he survive the annual floods when the river rose and swept along with it all sorts of dangerous objects, branches of trees, dead bodies of animals that might suddenly crash against his little boat? He never talked to a living soul, and we never talked about him. My sister got married, but Mother didn't want a wedding party. It would have been a sad affair, for we thought of him every time we ate some especially tasty food. Just as we thought of him in our cosy beds on a cold, stormy night, out there, alone and unprotected, trying to bail out the boat with only his hands and a gourd. Now and then someone would say that I was getting to look more and more like my father, but he didn't seem to care about us at all. I felt affection and respect for him, and whenever they praised me because I had done something good, I said, "My father taught me to act that way." It wasn't exactly accurate, but it was a truthful sort of lie. My sister had a baby boy. She insisted on showing father his grandson. One beautiful day we all went down to the riverbank, my sister in her white wedding dress, and she lifted the baby high. Her husband held a parasol above them. We shouted to father and waited. He didn't appear. My sister cried. We all cried in each other's arms. My sister and her husband moved far away. My brother went to live in a city. Times changed with their usual imperceptible rapidity. Mother finally moved too. She was old and went to live with her daughter. I remained behind, a leftover. I could never think of marrying. I just stayed there with the impedimenta of my life. Father, wandering alone and forlorn on the river, needed me. People told me that they had heard that father had explained it to the man who made the boat. But now this man was dead and nobody knew or remembered anything. There was just some foolish talk, when the rains were especially severe and persistent, that my father was wise like Noah and had the boat built in anticipation of a new flood. My hair was beginning to turn grey. I have only sad things to say. What bad had I done? What was my great guilt? My father always away, and his absence always with me. And the river, always the river, perpetually renewing itself. The river, always. I was beginning to suffer from old age, in which life is just a sort of lingering. I had attacks of illness and of anxiety. I had a nagging rheumatism. And he? Why was he doing it? He must have been suffering terribly. He was so old. One day, in his failing strength, he might let the boat capsize, or he might let the current carry it downstream, on, until it plunged over the waterfall to the boiling turmoil below. It pressed upon my heart. Out with it. Had I gone crazy? No, in our house that word was never spoken, never through all the years. No one called anybody crazy, for nobody is crazy. Well, maybe everybody. All I did was go there and wave a handkerchief so he would be more likely to see me. I was in complete command of myself. I waited. Finally he appeared in the distance. There. Then over there. A vague shape sitting in the back of the boat. I called to him several times, and I said what I was so eager to say, to state formally and under oath. I said it as loud as I could. "Father! You have been out there long enough. You are old. Come back. You don't have to do it any more. Come back and I'll go instead. Right now, if you want. Any time. I'll get into the boat. I'll take your place." And when I had said this, my heart beat more firmly. He heard me. He stood up. He manoeuvred with his oars and headed the boat toward me. He had accepted my offer. And suddenly I trembled down deep, for he had raised his arm and waved, the first time in so many years, and I couldn't. In terror, my hair on end, I ran, I fled madly, for he seemed to be coming from another world. I experienced the dreadful sense of cold that comes from deadly fear, and I became ill. Nobody ever saw or heard about him again. Am I a man after such a failure? I am what never should have been. I must stay in the deserts and unmarked plains of my life. But when death comes, I want them to take me and put me in a little boat on this perpetual water between the long shores, and I, down the river, lost in the river, inside the river, the river.